I talked about seekers and solvers. You've been doing some very deep work on the question of solvers, looking at the solvers in incentive or top code or even in open source and so on. Why do these uniquely qualified minds want to get involved? I've had people say over and over again, isn't this open innovation is a big ripoff? It's great for the company and you have all these suckers out there that provide great input. I mean, what's the motivation for the solvers?
Yeah, I think what happens is that people look at these things and say, either they're foolish, they're not well qualified, or they're altruists. So, you know, in open source, people look at open source developers and say they must be communists because they have these great IP sharing regimes. And then when they look at these competitions, they say, well, they must not know their own value, and that's why they're participating. But when we ask them why they participate, and we actually measure that with performance, we see two very interesting things. One is many people say they participate for what we call intrinsic motivations, for the fun of it, for the learning of it, for the enjoyment of it. So, like, I'm a terrible programmer. That's why I became a management professor. But there are people who love programming, right? And they can just solve programming problems all day long, and they will just love it. And so the fun of the intellectual challenge and the fun of solving problems drives many people. And this we find both in open source communities as well as in people participating in competitions. The other aspect, of course, is also the fact that they can compete and they can actually see themselves against other people. So there's because many of these systems are transparent, you can see how well you do against other people. People want to give a social signal saying, hey, I'm a very qualified person. And this extrinsic motivation, you might win something, you might solve a problem, but you also get recognition, is a major driver. The final thing which sort of cuts across both of these motivations, so intrinsic, having fun, extrinsic, giving a signal, winning the award money, is actually sort of this belonging to the community, right? There's a big affiliation going on where people no longer affiliate with being with P&G or with being with Cisco, but being a hacker, being a programmer, being a chemist, being a solver, and learning across firm networks. What firms do is that they lock people up and they don't allow you to meet with other chemists in a different organization for a variety of reasons. And these settings now allow people to collaborate and to meet other people and to build their own community. And that's a major driver.
Now, would you say also that there's going to be market forces will be brought to bear? Like, I think, incentives started off and some of the challenges were, tens of thousands of dollars. And now you see these $1 million prizes. Eventually, if you're going to create real value, the market will determine that you need to be compensated for that, or wrong.
I think the compensation model is actually very interesting. What we find actually is that the big prizes can sometimes give the wrong signal. They say, oh, it must be a really hard problem, so maybe you shouldn't participate, or maybe it'll take a lot of effort. Yeah. But in my analysis of incentive and other settings, what happens is that it's the people who are not in the major field of the problem that can solve the actual challenge that's being posted. And sometimes they might not themselves value what the knowledge they might have already. So there's a big balance between large prizes where you need a lot of effort, like the XPRIZE for aerospace or for genomics. But in many of the smaller problems, in fact, there's a balance between too large a prize and people participating or not.
How do you know that people are going to show up? You run the flag up the pole, you say, we're going to do this big thing, it's really exciting, there's a prize of little or big. I mean, isn't there kind of a big risk?
Oh, it's a huge risk. I mean, I think there are many, well, there's two things. One, will people show up and will the right things get done? So you showed the Doritos example. I think Chevy had a similar commercial adventure a few years back, and I think it was for their SUV, right? Yeah. And I think everybody sort of made up commercials that sort of how bad the trucks were for the environment. So one is you have to learn to give up control, and that you're going to get a heterogeneity of responses, and then you need to have some kind of a filtering mechanism, and you might also be open to criticism and be up for sort of a public scrutiny. The first question, though, where you asked, will people show up? I think, what happens is that many organizations don't realize there's already a huge community of users, of people interested in what they're doing. And I had an interesting conversation with the food company. They said, oh, we don't have any user communities around our foods. We do basic foods. And I said, well, let's look at your most basic of foods. It's a granola. So within the space of half a day, we identified 300 granola hacking communities. These were people that were self-organizing around new recipes for granola, new uses for granola, and they were just totally missing the boat. So I think the big thing is that people do show up. You just have to open up yourself and be brave enough to go out there and get the feedback you want.